So the next story that we are going to share is from another former numerary member of Opus Dei. This is someone who I have talked about before on this channel. I am a big fan of her work and her willingness to share so candidly about her experiences. I am talking about Eileen Johnson. She has written and spoken extensively about her time in and experiences with Opus Dei. She was a member for 11 years and was groomed by her French teacher and whistled when she was just 16 years old. Eileen has pushed back repeatedly on the idea that Opus Dei does not exert undue control or influence over people's lives. She has stated that it has been said by defendants of Opus Dei that those who join do so willingly and have no right to criticize the organization after they leave. Such a judgment overlooks the fact that people, especially young, impressionable people, do not join cults. They are recruited, often after being groomed. This process can erode their ability to make informed decisions of their own or use their free will. The targeted individuals, usually teenagers, are normally intelligent and gifted and good leaders. They are made to feel cared for and special. They develop a great sense of belonging to a spiritual family that claims to be destined to transform society by winning people over to the teachings of its founder, Jose Maria Escriva. During 3 of her 11 years, Eileen worked as an assistant directress at a student center. Due to her position, she was able to access information and documentation that the average member or the public do not see. This included the fact that Opus Dei chose to respond to members' struggles by instructing them to go to an Opus Dei psychiatrist, fomenting active distrust of the individual's experiences through gaslighting and shifting the blame from the institution onto the individual. Not only did Eileen witness this happen to others, but it happened to her as well, to such a degree that she questioned her own lived reality and grasp on sanity. In an article titled Dead or Alive, an Opus Dei Survivor Speaks, published on Opus Libris, Eileen discusses how even 50 years on from her experiences, she still struggles to put those experiences into words, partly out of a desire not to cause harm or distress to the good people that she knew while she was on the inside. But she feels it is her duty to speak up and share the truth. She says, life in the work suits many, but many others, having been recruited too early in their lives, have suffered to varying degrees over time as a result. This was true in my case and in that of many others too. The outcome was deeply damaging for me. Her personal experiences with those representing authority in Opus Dei were, to be quite frank, harrowing and disturbing. She wrote, "At 16, I was a bright and happy student, an all-rounder who loved singing, dancing, and life in general. I wanted to become a language teacher, and it seemed I was poised to move on to a successful adulthood. I had met my first love. This was one of the happiest times of my life. But I was unaware that I was being watched by an Opus Dei numerary, one of my school teachers, who proceeded to groom me through her friendship. I had never heard of Opus Dei and did not know she was a member. After I left Opus Dei 12 years later, I was a shadow of my former self. I became suicidal, and my doctor said that the only cases he had seen of this level of distress were former prisoners of war. Why? Well, for one thing, I had been on medication prescribed by Opus Dei numeraries, doctors, and psychiatrists for 4 years before I was able to leave. I was one of many treated in such a way. This was unethical. Had I been able to consult an objective doctor, I may well have left 4 years sooner than I did. Independent diagnosis after I left concluded that my problems arose due to the regime I had been subjected to and the cocktail of drugs prescribed. Our GP, Hyacinth Hickey, who on her arrival in the UK from Ireland in the 60s was put in charge of the health of all of us numeraries and assistant numeraries, had prescribed a variety of drugs to several of us. In my case, she tried me on Librium, Tofranil, Mogadon, and lithium before settling on Valium. When I was sent to Pamplona for a year to study journalism at Opus Dei's University of Navarre, the treatment was handed over to my spiritual directress, a Spanish woman doctor who continued to prescribe Valium to me and medication to another English numerary who accompanied me. I have heard of numbers of former assistant numeraries and numeraries who were drugged in-house by fellow members of Opus Dei in the UK, Spain, North and South America. Many, like myself, were referred to Opus Dei psychiatrists. This was totally unethical, involving clear conflicts of interest. interest. When I was eventually able to consult a doctor in the outside world after leaving Opus Dei, he said that the only comparable case in his experience was that of a former prisoner of war. I have heard similar reports from other former members, particularly those who spent many years in Opus Dei and/or were of a sensitive disposition. A major criticism of Opus Dei, in my experience, is that we were recruited with scant regard for our individuality or for our well-being or personal development. We were, quite simply, used. The recruitment and treatment of the assistant numeraries was a particularly obvious and stark example of this. Yet the systemic exploitation, coercion, and brainwashing of numeraries, specifically in the women's section, was also appalling. For me, the worst thing was the use of friendship as a tool for proselytism. As someone who values friendship greatly, to be without friends over many years was a form of social starvation, so that when I left, I felt dangerously alone in the world. My doctor, very concerned about the degree of my isolation as I approached my 30th birthday, suggested that I contact Opus Dei to see if one or other of my former sisters might come to see me. My mother phoned and spoke to a numerary who had formerly been a close friend of her and our family. She agreed to come and arrived the following day for a brief visit. The next day, she phoned to say she had been instructed not to contact me again. She said she was phoning from a coin box in the street to avoid being overheard. That lady was genuinely fond of me, of my mother and my family, particularly my young nephews. She was the same age as me, had joined Opus Dei at the age of 14, and was popping Valium with alarming frequency. Soon after this, I took an overdose. I remember facing the probability of death, but the prospect of going on existing in such despair, isolation, and rejection was too bleak. After I came round in hospital, my doctor took me off the Valium I had become dependent on. A week later, he commented, "Ah, now I see the real Eileen. Your eyes have come alive." Opus Dei generates a great amount of fear. It is said that fear is mentioned more often in the Bible than any other word. Fear is a limiting and negative human emotion. According to Christian scripture, perfect love casts out fear. There should be no problem about speaking out one's opinion, offering constructive criticism. In fact, such criticism is a responsible, helpful attitude, though difficult to express and often not well accepted. In Opus Dei, to criticize the perfect work of God was deemed to be down to pride. The day I left, I spoke to the prelate of Opus Dei in Britain in the confessional. I told him that I thought my depressive illness had been wrongly handled by members of Opus Dei prescribing me drugs, and Opus Dei psychiatrists becoming involved, and my spiritual directors going along with the process. Again, he said I was proud to criticize the work. With hindsight, I see I was right. In fact, I knew at the time I was right, though I was too broken to state my case. It took me some 20 years to be able to speak out. First, I needed to recover and live as normal a life as possible. There is something wrong when so many individuals need to remain anonymous and are afraid to speak out. Not that I am saying that wounded former members should speak out. Big priority is recovery and to make available whatever caring support each one may need. However, Opus Dei generates a great deal of fear. The prelature should be obliged to acknowledge serious damage done to many people, so often as a result of irresponsible proselytism that failed to consider the good of the individual. Their tactics are systemic, described by Jose Maria Escriva in The Way and in many internal documents and in his various talks to members. Eileen's experiences are eerily similar to Valio's. Both individuals were true believers in Opus Dei's mission. Both rose to positions of authority within the organization's administration, and for both of them, the reality that they were forced to contend with ultimately became the factor which destroyed their faith in the institution and exposed the true nature of the organization that they had devoted so many years of their life to.